But one of the other things that she talks about is how each of us has to bring whatever are our special gifts to the work that we do, and that not everyone can become a passionate community advocate from the life experience that she has, but each of us has a role to play in making the world a better place for girls who grow up poor and influenced by alcohol and drug abuse, poverty, the social welfare system, and criminal justice. And so from my role as the director of the Department of Community Justice here in Multnomah County, I feel like I have a role to play in trying to make the world a better place for those girls and also for the young men who come into our system of juvenile justice. The Department of Community Justice at Multnomah County is your probation and parole and juvenile detention organization. What we do is work with the kids who are identified by the community as being delinquent and try to figure out how we can help them grow up to be better adults. And in doing that, we wind up detaining kids, placing them on probation, sending them to treatment and services, getting involved with their families, getting involved in a lot of social service systems that are designed to help them. And hopefully, I'm hopeful that in that role, a part of what we're also doing is empowering them to make the changes that they need to make in their own lives. Because ultimately, it's only through changes in themselves that our youth can grow up, and changes in their families and a community to support them, that our youth can grow up to be the pro-social adults that we want them to be and the citizens of our community that we really want them to be. What I wanted to talk to you about today is just a few things about your juvenile justice system and the services that Multnomah County provides that I think are making a difference in the lives of youth in our community. And then I wanted to talk to you about an opportunity that you have to get involved in these youth who need so much to have pro-social adults in their lives. And one thing I'd like to say before I do that is that there are many people in this audience who make a difference in the lives of these girls and youth that I'm talking about. And we've got a couple of juvenile family court judges here. We have people from service providers and other organizations that connect with our kids. And we have the director of the Multnomah County Library, which plays a big role in making sure that kids grow up being able to read and enjoy education in our community. And your juvenile justice system wouldn't be the system that it is today without those folks' efforts along with us in making a difference. Nothing that we do we do in isolation, and I think that's true of every good thing that happens in our community. I want to tell you just really quickly about the system that I lead. We have about 1,000 youth who are on probation every year. About 71% of them are boys, and about 28% of them are girls. The number of girls is growing. It used to be about 21% about 5 years ago, and it's grown significantly in the last while. 42% of those kids are Anglo, and 32% are African American, and 10% are Hispanic. If you know the percentages of populations of people of color in our community, you know that with those percentages, kids of color are overrepresented in our juvenile justice system, as they are nationwide in juvenile justice systems, which is something that all of us need to pay critical attention to, because when kids get involved in the juvenile justice system, it's a very bad sign for the rest of their lives. Most youth on probation are on probation for offenses such as theft, criminal mischief, or drug use. Less than 10% of the youth on probation have been convicted of robbery or a sex offense or another violent offense. Many kids in our system have serious drug and alcohol and mental health problems. And not only that, they have much more severe physical and behavioral health problems than similar kids who are not in the juvenile justice system. Now, this is both the good and the bad. One of the things that it means is that there are kids out there who are really have a lot of challenges to face in order to get to health and mental health as well. The flip side of that is that as a system, one of our goals is to not get involved in the lives of kids that we don't need to be involved in. And so if in your juvenile justice system you have more kids who are kids with the most difficulties. That means that we're being effective in making sure that we are not scooping up, casting too wide a net, and getting involved in the justice system, which is a very intrusive system where we can lock people up and impose all kinds of conditions on them. We really want to push kids out of our system into other service systems and into a safety net in the community that can help them and their families to live better lives and hopefully help change their communities instead of being punitive and capturing them in a criminal justice system. In the face of much concern in our community about a lot of social issues, and there are a lot of demands that our kids have, we are actually experiencing a decrease in juvenile crime. Juvenile crime is down by about 25% in Multnomah County since 1998. We're seeing a flattening out of that curve of that decrease, but we've seen a definite decline in juvenile crime. And delinquency, you know, if you watch the local news, you would think almost that every kid in your community is delinquent or involved in crime because the local news puts violence and criminality front and center in just about every broadcast. The reality is that very few kids in our community are actually involved in the juvenile justice system. Less than 5% of the youth who are 10 to 17 years old are involved in the justice system. And violent youth represent only 1 out of every 100 youth in our community. And so that tells you that in our juvenile justice system, we're talking about a very small number of kids and a very concentrated effort with those kids to really make a difference in their lives. Most kids on probation do not reoffend. This is the great news. Almost 8 out of every 10 kids on probation do not commit a new crime after probation is over. Now, we don't necessarily take credit for that. I think that we are using in our juvenile justice system some evidence-based practices that have been proven nationally to make a difference in kids' lives, and that's really the good news. But we know that kids don't reoffend when they have a whole network of services and supports wrapped around them. And so part of what we're trying to do is not only do a better job in terms of probation and parole, but work with other service systems and support systems and community-based organizations to make sure that kids are getting wrapped around them the supports and services that they need. And unfortunately, mostly we see the failures because those are the kids that come back to us. But the reality is that most of the kids that we touch actually don't wind up going on to be adult criminals. Several studies tell us that nationally, only about 18% of the kids who get involved in the juvenile justice system actually wind up going on to be involved in the adult criminal justice system. So really, what you're looking at here in Multnomah County is a system that's doing, I think, a very effective job of intervening with the kids that we've got and sorting the kids out of that system that don't need our intervention. You know, there's been a lot of discussion about jail overcrowding and how many jail beds we need in the adult system. One of the reforms that we've undertaken in the juvenile justice system is to use our detention resource, which is the most expensive resource in the criminal justice system, wisely, and also to use that resource fairly. Across the country, in detention facilities where juveniles are held, youth of color are grossly disproportionately represented in the population of kids who are held. Now, some of that is because more kids of color are brought to the door of detention facilities. But also, a lot of it is driven by the decisions that are made about who's going to be released, that's brought by the police, and which kids are going to be held. What we've done in Multnomah County over the last 10 years is an effort to do juvenile detention reform. And in that effort, we've done 2 things. Number 1, we've dramatically reduced the number of kids who are held in detention and moved kids that would have been held in detention into secure resources in the community where they can be monitored and can attend court, which is one of the reasons why you want to put a kid in detention pretrial. And secondly, we've closed the gap between the numbers of kids of color who are detained versus the Anglo kids who are detained. When we started the effort in 1995, about 45% of the African American and Latino youth that were brought to our door by the police were detained in detention. But only 35% of the white kids were detained in detention. Today, those numbers are almost exactly the same. About 35% of all of the kids that are brought to the door are detained and released. And we've created alternatives for the police to take kids that we're not going to detain. We want to appreciate the services of Janeth Youth Services and New Avenues for Youth, who run downtown youth services that receive kids that the police know we're not going to detain. And then we run other resources for those kids to make sure that they show up for their court. Now, this may seem like very boring work, who's detained and who's held and how we do it. And, it's hard to get passionate about it. But if you think about it, what we're talking about is we're talking about taking the freedom away from children and making that a just and fair decision about who we take the freedom away from. And we all as a community want to make sure that we're taking that freedom away from kids in an equitable and fair way, and that we're making a decision that's a decision about protecting the community, not a decision for kids who are pretrial about punishing the kids. And so that's what we've done in our juvenile justice system, and it's really, we think, making a difference, not only in what happens to the kids, not only in the opportunities that those kids get, but also in the money, your tax money, that we're spending more wisely than we have before, and in the equity and justice that we've created. Now, I want to talk to you a minute about the opportunity that you all have to get involved in the lives of kids in the juvenile justice system. With the help of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, we've been involved in a process to try to improve the outcomes for kids who are involved in juvenile justice and who have drug and alcohol issues. And that's involved a lot of efforts, one of which has been improving drug and alcohol treatment, improving access to treatment, making sure that we know we're doing better assessment of kids to make sure they get to the right treatment. But one of the other things that we know about making sure that kids are a success is that they need caring, pro-social adults in their lives. And this is something that you may absolutely know in your head, but need to know in your heart, which is that most of the kids that we're involved with in the juvenile justice system have struggled in their lives to find caring, pro-social adults. Many of them have been in and out of foster care. They've been involved in families where there's been a lot of issues in the family, and it's been very hard for them to find people who believed in them and supported them and had the space in their life to connect with them. And so one of the things that we've launched as a part of this effort with the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation is an effort called When You Were 15. And what the When You Were 15 effort is about is trying to recruit adult mentors to volunteer with the Boys Big Brother, Big Sister program here in Multnomah County, to create more capacity in that program to provide mentors to kids like the kids in our juvenile justice system. In the When You Were 15 campaign, part of what we're trying to do is to gather stories from adults and kids and present those stories to the community about what people were doing when they were 15. Now, some of us may not want to expose to the public what we were doing when we were 15, but we've gotten some very wonderful and very interesting and passionate stories. And obviously, some of these are from very prominent people, but some of them are from very ordinary people who are able to share with us what adults meant to them when they were adults, what they were up to, what was important to them. And we've got kids in the juvenile justice system working with the Right Around Oregon project to try to write their stories about what they were doing when they were 15. The campaign is then going to publish those stories. We're going to put them on the web and use that as an opportunity to try to encourage a dialogue and promote the volunteerism of adults in the community to get connected with the Big Brothers, Big Sisters to be mentors for kids. And I think it's a very potent reminder to all of us. It's very easy to think about the kids who are in the juvenile justice system as those kids. And the reality is they are our kids. And when we look at what we were doing when we were 15, many of us were struggling with many of the same issues that the kids in the juvenile justice system confront. Oftentimes, many of us who have succeeded in our lives had greater opportunities than those kids. We had more social supports than many of them have, and that made a difference. And what we're trying to do with this effort is connect those opportunities and social supports with kids that may not have them. I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to turn it over to Lateefah, who is going to talk to you about her very inspiring story and the work that she's done. And it's again, another reminder to us about what we all can do as people to really make a difference in the lives of kids in our community. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's amazing to be here among you all. I am a San Franciscan and just landed last night. This is a beautiful county and a beautiful city, and so I'm very humbled to have the opportunity to talk about the work that I have been so lucky to have been a part of in San Francisco. But before I begin, I want to talk a little bit about where I am now. I'm old. I'm 29. I just made 29 on the 29th. And right? Okay, give me one more year, and then I think the applause will be more deserved. After working with young women and girls who, like me, at 15 and 14, were struggling through the depths of poverty, I transitioned out of running an organization, which I will talk about, to returning to school. And I attend a very small and affluent liberal arts school for women in Oakland, California, Mills College. What's so interesting about attending this very small school where the undergrad population is slightly under 850 is being in conversation and in dialogue with young women who are of similar age to the young women that I'd worked for on the streets and in juvenile halls and locked institutions, and understanding what privilege and education gives a child. When you have parents who care and who are there, and there are conversations at dinner that are beautiful, and when there is dinner, listening to these girls, and here I am, 28, listening to the brilliance, the understanding that they've traveled the world. I was in class actually yesterday in my econ class, and I have young women talking about external markets across the globe because they've been there, they've seen them, they've experienced them. And then I think about Helen. I think about Helen, who is the same age as Jenny, who sits next to me in econ. And Helen, less than 3 weeks ago, was walking with her baby barefoot in my city, in San Francisco, one of the richest cities in the globe. Helen was arrested. Since the last time I saw her, she was in the program that I worked for. And I thought about her story in conjunction with this other young woman that I'm now a colleague with in school. Helen's mother was addicted to crack cocaine. And from a very early age, a child, 2, 3, and 4, and 5, this beautiful young woman, girl at that time, had experienced more hell than many adults, bartered and sold for crack cocaine. She had experienced rape and trauma and assault more times than one could count on both hands by the time she was 10. And I think about other young women who shared those same stories. And what I've done when I've traveled the country, when talking about this particular population, to me it seems very simple. Why care? These are not our girls. They only make up a very small fraction of the population. What's so interesting about dissecting who these girls are, why we should care? It's simple. Hurt people hurt people. Why has Helen been violent? Why has she acted out in school? I am not a psychologist yet, but what I do know is that in the cities across the globe, and yes, here in Portland, there are so many girls who will touch the criminal and juvenile justice system simply because systems and people and individuals, and especially the folks who are supposed to love them, have failed them. And because they have been so hurt and manipulated, they will rightfully act out. So whether it's stealing at Nordstrom, or it's hurting someone on the bus, or it's figuring out how to self-medicate all those years of pain, many young women, not just the ones who are engulfed in the system now, but will commit crimes, will act out, will leave school, will become the people that we need to struggle to create a stronger safety net for. So then what do? And we understand that every single community, just because that community is poor, doesn't mean you're going to herd a ton of people into the criminal justice system. But what we do know is that there are many dysfunctional families, sometimes with both mother and father, that are hurting their children. We understand that schools in all of our counties, not just in my county, in this county, and counties abroad, states abroad, don't have the resources to look at that one child and say, "Child, why are you not here on time? Why is your belly always grumbling?" Now we think that we have those resources, but there are so many children that, yes, are being left far behind. Those children end up behind bars. Those children enter the criminal justice system, and we spend up to $45,000 housing them. I'm so nervous about an influx of now the children from the drug war age, from the 80s, who have come of age and who are now having children, what those fates will be. When I was 17 years old, I had left high school. And during that stint of dropping out to work full time to support myself and my sister and my mother who was struggling with addiction, I was able to find a sanctuary. I was able to find a very small developing CBO where the founder thought, if I take girls who have experienced what we call the underground street economy, whether it's prostitution, drug sales, or just downright being down in the dumps, being forgotten by school systems and social service systems, if I take these young women and put them into a physical, mental, and educational space where they get to develop their own solutions and develop their own problems, learn how to raise money, learn how to run a small nonprofit corporation, what'll happen? What I'm excited about now, 12 years later, is that the Center for Young Women's Development is a national model for bringing in young women and providing them workforce development opportunities, educational opportunities, and of course, what's so important to me, a peer-run space. Actually, the new director is here now. I left in February to return to school, Marlene Sanchez, you should stand up, who's 25 and running a $1.2 million organization annually. We're very proud of that. Because each year, this small little microcosm that started out as an experiment now employs 20 girls from the streets and from jail cells. And they're employing girls. I still say we sometimes because I grew up there. Came there at 17, left at 28. But we employed girls every year, hundreds now, cumulatively, to heal. Something that social service necessarily couldn't do. Being an independent nonprofit organization, starting in 1993, we realized that we could do something different. I won't tell you the whole story because it's such a long, beautiful, drawn-out story. You can go to the website, cywd.org, and see beautiful Marlene and the rest of the great staff and all the programs. But what I leave you with in talking about the program in the organization is that we've traveled the globe from South Africa to Brazil, talking to government, local government, the private sector, and both the public sector about how you can interweave opportunity with folks who have been forgotten by everyone. It's easy and it's cheap. You provide folks with healing opportunities, and when I say healing, not just everybody needs a hug, but yes, everybody does need mental health services, especially if they've been victims of trauma and sexual assault. If you go on Craigslist.org, I did it twice, 2 nights ago, and looked in Portland, Oregon, you have young women who are being prostituted in this city, in this county, who are being preyed upon. Those young women definitely are experiencing. You go to Craigslist.org, click on erotic services. Young women all over the country, regardless of socioeconomic status oftentimes, are in situations when they definitely need space to grow, to heal, to come back into educational spheres. Those young women who are being exploited in prostitution and the young women who are being exploited in the drug trade, who's to say that they don't deserve our best? The Center for Young Women's Development and its peer-run model provides that space. Why have we been so successful? It's because we've asked folks from the private sector, no, we don't necessarily just need your money, although that's nice. Step up and look at this population who you wouldn't recognize necessarily as a good employee, and figure out spaces within your corporation where you can prioritize this population. We've actually recently worked in my new work, I'm working with the district attorney, we've worked with Nordstrom in San Francisco, and they've developed programming where they're hiring and they're training young people who've been involved with the criminal and juvenile justice system to be a part of their workforce. And for them, it's the right thing to do, but it's also, folks won't steal from them if they're working from them, and they're training them and they're paying them well. Private sector actually has stepped up, we know, in many different sectors of criminal justice and working with girls. But one of the things that I would encourage you all to look at before I finish is thinking outside of the box and understanding that the pathologies of young people, especially young women in the juvenile justice system, it's not that necessarily that complicated. When we have hurt people, especially hurt children, who then grow up to hurt other children and other people, we can stop that, not just through prevention, but through really good intervention. It's by funding good programs, being mentors, but more importantly, providing space in this county, in this city, for young people to have leadership opportunities. Transforming pain into power means young people who have been through some tumultuous circumstances, giving them the space to design and create solutions for themselves. It's not as hard as it sounds. And when young people have the opportunity to voice their dreams and their hopes, you will see magic. We've done it. We've done it in San Francisco, and you're doing it here. Young people in this city, in this county, and in this country, especially from this generation, they need an out, not an in, to the criminal justice system. Through workforce development, through the private sector opening itself up to this reality, through the public sector understanding that it's time to step up and fight the big demons and put this money where it needs to be in education, good things will happen. But you can act now. And this is your call to action, to think about this group of young women. Think about the Helens and the Danielles and your daughters who need to create a better future now. So thank you for having me here.
We'll now open the floor for questions. Again, questions are a privilege for City Club members only. And you can ask questions from either of the microphones and take no implication from the signs on the microphones. The first question will be asked by our board host, Susan Hammer. Susan is our president-elect, and she is a Portland attorney, mediator, and arbitrator. She's been a City Club member since 1981. Susan?
Thank you, Doug, and thank you, Joanne and Lateefah, for a very interesting presentation, and taking us all back to the time when we were 15, if we can remember that far back. Amidst all the problems that we hear about in the juvenile justice system, we are hearing some positive news, and that is that the rates of unintended teenage pregnancies and teenage motherhood are dropping. It was even mentioned in the State of the Union address. And there are people from every quarter taking credit for this, but I'd be interested in your views as to why this is occurring and if there are any lessons in this success that are transferable to other areas where we are focusing.
I don't know if I'm going to completely answer your question, but I was a teen mom. I had my daughter when I was 19 years old. And she's 9 now, and it's so strange when we go out in public because I know I still look very young, but I'm not. I'm almost 30. But what's interesting about that dichotomy, I honestly thought I waited. When I got pregnant, I was over 18, and now I look back, and that's so young, being 19 and a mom. I was the oldest in my community of my little clique. I was the oldest in terms of waiting and having a baby. When your norm is your norm, you're not, it wasn't alarming to my community. It wasn't alarming to teachers. It wasn't alarming that I was this young girl walking down the street pregnant. So how do we change the dichotomy of waiting and prioritizing education? I think it's not just an abstinence education. It's by really training young women that they're worth it and that they should be able to see the world. And that education, like I was saying in a speech this morning, they provide our wings to liberation, and providing young women with more scholarship opportunities. It's very difficult for girls, especially in low-income neighborhoods, to understand there's more than parenting. And so I'll stop there.
I have to agree with Lateefah that I think that it's about changing norms and about changing what young women expect of themselves and what the community signals to them that they can expect of themselves. Many of the young women that we deal with in the juvenile justice system have been programmed from very young to not expect that, some of them, that they're not going to expect to live to adulthood, that they live in such circumstances of violence that they're going to be shocked if they get to 30. And then in addition to that, obviously the expectation that it's perfectly okay to become pregnant and have a kid and leave school at a very early age, or it's really okay to get involved in the juvenile justice system because everyone else around you is. And so I think it is about changing the messages that kids get. And hopefully this new information about the drops in teen pregnancy rate is a message that around teen pregnancy in many sectors in our community, that message is changing. And I think it's a sign that we can change those other messages as well.
Guinevere Milius, City Club member. I realize that neither of you are here representing the Boys and Girls Club, but you mentioned the mentorship program that they're developing as part of the When You Were 15 project. And I'm wondering if you can talk about what kind of demand they're seeing for mentors, how long the waiting list is right now for kids who want mentors, and if it's possible for you to maybe expound upon how mentors have affected kids in your programs in a positive way to maybe inspire my fellow City Club members to take part.
Sure. I don't know the statistics about how long the waiting list is or how many kids are on the list. I do know that there are far more youth, young women and young men in our community who need mentors in their lives than there are mentors stepping up to work with them. And there are several organizations in our community who provide mentorship opportunities, but the Boys and Girls Clubs is one of them. The Big Brother, Big Sister program is a nationally recognized model of mentorship. What mentorship involves is, first of all, you receive some training and orientation so that you can know what to expect. And then basically it's about creating a relationship, a one-to-one relationship with a child. So one adult to one child, really creating that connection, that very personal connection, helping to share experiences together and to share your experience as an adult with that child. And it's both creating a role model and also creating a sense of encouragement and hope and expanding of horizons for kids who haven't had the opportunity to interact with people who are doing something very different with their lives perhaps than what that young man or young woman is seeing in their community. And that's the essence of mentorship. Mentorship has been shown in research over and over again that pro-social adults in kids' lives makes a huge difference in reducing their delinquency, their teen pregnancy, their getting involved in drug and alcohol involvement, and ultimately moving on to being involved in the adult system. And so we know that we can help make a difference in kids by getting connected with them in this way.
A couple of other tangible examples. Everyone in this room, regardless how close you want to get to this issue, there's something that immediately comes to my mind. For children right now in detention, we know that girls get less visits than boys. Am I right, my detention folks? And so that's one of the things that we encourage folks to do in San Francisco, whether it's writing letters to young women, anonymous letters with a book attached, developing a book drive. You don't necessarily have to do face-to-face mentorship. But oftentimes kids in detention or when they're leaving detention, they don't have books. We raised 3,000 books, the center, last year and the year before that for young women, new books, leaving detention. Girls, especially when they're in group home situations, they're away from their families, they're far away from their families, when they're detained at their local juvenile halls. Girls like to journal and write. Some of the most beautiful budding writers are young people who are in crisis, from providing young people with scholarship funds who are in the juvenile justice system to attend college. What happens to a foster kid when they're going to college and the dorms close down for the summer? The kid has no place to go. There are all types of opportunities that we can organize around to really not just create a safety net for young people who are going through these systems, but to provide an outlet so they understand that their county cares about them. And from the moment of institutionalization to the exit to the reentry, that there is not just a criminal justice system responsible for making sure that they succeed, but literally the whole community.
Hi, my name is Michelle Moore Hernandez, a City Club member. I moved here recently from California and spent a year or two volunteering in the California Youth Authority, working with about 30 sex offenders. And I was curious as to what you find unique about working with young women as opposed to young men.
I think that, I don't know if you worked at the Chadarian School. Did you work at Chad?
Los area.
Okay. Ventura?
Yes.
Okay, that's the girls' facility is
I'll
there
show
as
you-
well.
so- no, sorry, I was out in the, with the boys' facility.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think girls, to me, young women, everyone who walked through the door of the Center for Young Women's Development, and Marlene can attest, those young women were really open about wanting to begin what we call the healing process. And so would open up a lot quicker. And honestly, wanted to do better regardless how many times they would slip up. And I think that young women, like young men, want a safe space to grow. But I have had very mixed experiences with young women and young men in terms of like how their process goes. I'm working with mostly young men now who are felony drug offenders. And my experience with girls is that they just want amazing relationships. They want relationships that are pure, where folks are not taking advantage of who they are, what they have. And that's pretty much the extent of it. But also that I think girls are just really smart and amazingly artistic because that's, but also oftentimes young men need the same things. Most of the time they need the same things. Art outlets, they need mentors, they need folks who care about them and who are looking at them succeeding as a responsibility.
Carol Witherell, City Club member. At a time when there's a cutting of resources and assistance to low-income families and youth, and at the same time, larger classes in schools with less access to caring adults on a one-on-one basis. And thirdly, the love affair that this country has with violence and the implosion of media violence, entertainment violence for sport. Is there a gathering storm that is going to haunt us if we continue down this cultural path?
Well, I certainly think that we know what it takes for young people to grow up and become good adults, adults that can have pro-social relationships and can be good citizens and function in the work world. And if we don't provide the supports for every family to be able to do that, we know that we're growing people who are not going to succeed as adults. And that's bad news for the fabric of the community. What we know that it takes for kids to succeed is, number one, staying in school. And so when schools aren't able to especially reach out to kids who have difficulty with academic success and connect with them around music or art or drama or sports or other things that can draw kids in, we know that we are not going to be able to engage kids in school. The next thing that we know that kids need to succeed is they need to have peer relationships that are supportive of positive behaviors rather than negative behaviors. And so when we don't support clubs and after-school activities and other activities that connect kids, and this is why Boys and Girls Clubs and some of those other organizations and scouting and other stuff is so important for kids, is that it creates a positive peer culture as opposed to a negative peer culture. The other thing that we know that that kids need is they need parents. And if they don't have parents that are being parents, then they need for the community to step up to provide that for them as well. And so when those services get cut, and also when the supports for parents to be able to provide things like health care or a job or economic support for their family gets cut, or mental health treatment for adults gets cut, we know that then the parents aren't going to be able to be the parents they need to be to grow the kids we want them to grow. And so I don't know if that's a perfect storm, but I know that if we're not investing in our community today, we are weakening the potential that we're growing a healthy generation of people for tomorrow.
I agree, and I think that I do see a storm around the country. And traveling from New York to the Midwest to the West Coast, seeing this generation, this young generation, teenage generation who understands teen culture, the population that we're talking about, low-income youth, the death culture. There are young people that I've worked for who have funeral outfits, who go to 6, 7, 8 funerals a year for their peers. And so what that translates then to is a young person who is so used to death, who then it's so much easier, do you understand me, to pick up a gun and shoot someone and walk away before that body drops. It's part of, yes, it's entertainment, but it's also what you see when you walk out the door. I remember when I was living in public housing before I moved out with my baby girl, seeing yellow tape. Every other week, it seemed like. It became the norm to me to see funeral t-shirts. Young people they wear t-shirts of their friends, that's how they're mourning them. So we should be very afraid at how we look at violence, not just in the media, but how young people are talking about death and dying in their schools. In every neighborhood from this city on, we're seeing violence. It's transitioning, but it's still happening. And gun violence, we have to figure out what to do about it. Because this culture, this death culture, and young people being, again, so used to the funeral and so not used to the graduations, it's definitely a paradigm that we have to shift.
My name is Chuck Frost. I'm a member of the club. Would our kids be in less trouble or more trouble if drugs were not illegal?
So Lateefah says I'm law enforcement, so I have to take that question. I don't know the answer to that. I think that, when drugs are illegal, we shift the response to the criminal justice system from the healthcare system in some ways. But I also don't know, which I don't think is necessarily the way to solve the problem, the underlying problem. I also don't know, though, whether or not making drugs legal is the right thing for the right message for our society and the right thing for us to do in terms of trying to build healthy adults as well. So I think it's a very difficult problem to solve. One of the things that I do know is that I think we have to address the underlying reasons why people turn to drugs to begin with, and that drugs aren't the issue, but things like poverty, isolation, lack of hopelessness, lack of hope about opportunities in your life, discrimination in our society, lack of access to education. Those are the things that drive, and a lack of really a fulfilledness about life are the things that drive people to use drugs, which then leads to addiction, which then leads to criminality.
Right on.
David was here before I was. Okay. BJ Seymour, City Club member. This is a question for Lateefah Simon, and I don't want it to sound dismissive, but we have heard today an outstandingly articulate and highly intelligent young woman who must be a marvelous role model for the young women with whom she works. But I can't help wondering, can these girls use you as a role model, or do they just say, oh, I could never be like her?
Well, it's a great question. What's so interesting about your question is in the design of the organization that we've built, it's peer-run. And so all of the young women are similar in age and experience. What we have done is create a model where learning is not just encouraged, but it's expected and it's mandatory. So whether it's language, before I came to the center, I was 19 at this organization, and we were bringing in consultants, and we were reading Chomsky and Paulo Freire, and we were going word by word by word and understanding and learning language, because we weren't given those kind of opportunities in elementary schools and junior highs and high schools in our neighborhoods. And so in creating an opportunity where girls run things, we wanted to be smart. So every single staff member in those 4 programs that Marlene runs, and when they're creating those beautiful budgets and they're figuring things out for themselves and they're learning how to get the state funds and they've gotten major funding from the Ford Foundation, these large foundations, we've worked together and expected the best from one another. And so as I stand and I talk to you today, the 17-year-old who just started at the Center for Young Women's Development would give the same talk. And so I look at her and challenge her to be more of a role model for me. We've sent girls to Harvard, there's girls at state colleges and private colleges, and you know what? They were actually, when more girls started going into school from these very, very tragic upbringings, it was then that I said, you know what, I need to quit this job and go to school. So we really have to look at, when we're talking about mentoring, when you mentor a kid from the juvenile justice system and they've lived for 15 years on this earth and they've seen more than some people see in a lifetime, you'll recognize and you'll understand that they have as much to teach you as you do to teach them. And so it's that teach and learn philosophy, I think, especially in youth development work, that keeps us humble and understanding the moment that I think I know more than sister girlfriend is when I lose her. That's when I lose her. And so I would like to think that I'm a role model and we all strive for that. But more importantly, I always want to learn from something that she's experienced, meaning the young women, or something that he's seen that's brought him to the point where now he's violent. What was that first interaction? And how did you stay alive? We have to ask questions and we have to listen differently. And so, I like to think that I'm cool, but I'm not that cool. The young women that we work for, they have so much to teach.
David Weber, City Club member. A much more boring question, unfortunately. Joanne, you said one of the reasons for a need for more pro-social adults in people's lives is they've been bounced around in foster care. But myself, not being a foster care parent, I would have thought that foster care parents are heroes of pro-social adulthood. Can you set me straight on all that?
Foster care parents are heroes for the work that they do. One of the dilemmas is kids move a phenomenal number of times from foster care home to foster care home. And so, part of the issue of parenting or being a role model in a kid's life is consistency. And unfortunately, our foster parent system doesn't offer many kids that consistency. And so what happens is a kid can just get connected with that foster parent and then they're off to the next foster parent. And each of those foster parents may be a very wonderful person in that kid's life for the time that they're involved with them. And I, by my comments, meant absolutely no disrespect for foster parents because I am in deep admiration of the work that they do. The other thing is that many of these kids can be very troubled, and sometimes they can be in a foster home where there are a lot of kids. And so the demands to take care of the basic needs of those kids can overpower the ability to create that special relationship.
Brian Campbell, City Club member. Lateefah, you mentioned that you'd been abroad and traveled amongst some of the other countries that are having similar issues. I was wondering if there's anything you could talk about that where you got some experience there from another culture, another country, another system that might have a bearing on what we need to think about in this country?
I was in Bahia in Brazil in 2004 and went to many of the armed favelas where there are a ton of street gangs who are very, very much armed. And the poverty is, I was awestruck, and I thought I witnessed and lived through and saw a lot of hopelessness here in our country. One of the things that was really interesting that law enforcement was trying to do in Bahia, Brazil, was look at community policing in a very different way. There were mandated schools that would take place on the weekends that were outside of the school district, where young people were told to go. And this is, again, the favelas, the low-income neighborhoods, they're very interesting, and it's just a very different dichotomy, but that you would have to go to the house of a teacher and spend a number of hours one-on-one with a teacher, and or two-on-one and three-on-one. So they were trying to figure out a new kind of educational system for wayward youth. One of the things that I learned from being in, we went to South Africa, that young people who were more affluent, even Black South Africans who had reached some kind of affluence, were pushed by local government to, quote unquote, organize with other young people who weren't in schools for better schools. And they were actually paid. You could look at it as almost like an AmeriCorps program, but to teach young people the importance of civic participation. In places and provinces where they weren't schools, we saw tons of would-be, hopefully one day, school children building their own schools, and the older young adults actually getting paid by the local and state governments, the local governments to assist in that project. So what I thought was interesting is just this push to look at how do you involve uninvolved young people who would be out in the streets doing other things, trying to survive. And I think we can take a lot of historical examples. In France, they've done some really interesting things with low-income youth. And I know even in countries like Cuba, they're really trying to figure out what they're going to do with the juvenile justice system. And so I think while we have a lot of different models, we look at Multnomah County as one of those models because you all have decreased detention more than any other state, I think this side of the Mississippi, and you have a model juvenile justice system with plenty of alternatives that actually don't exist in other places. And so the city and county of San Francisco has actually used this county as a model for decreasing our reliance on incarceration for young people. So I think you guys should give this woman an applause.
Andy Robeson, member. And as someone who grew up in the clutches of social workers, Ms. Fuller, you may forgive me when I say that I have troubles with the profession that linger to this day. I was a kid who failed in foster care, or it might even be fair to say foster care failed me, and the result of which was I was sent to a state-run orphanage, institutions that no longer exist. Kid coming along behind me now gets a pass, go to jail, go directly to jail, do not pass go, and definitely do not get $200. Someone was just talking about foster care, and other than the fact that foster parents are heroes, what are we doing to reform that terribly, terribly flawed system? Outside In did a study a few years ago and found that well over 90% of the kids that they served had been in foster care sometime in their lives, and roughly 2/3 of them came directly to that service, that street, those kids on the street right out there, they came directly from foster care. We don't even wait for them to age out anymore. We love it when they leave and we don't have to pay for them and they're on the streets of our city here. What are we doing about that system?
Well, for one thing, I don't run that system, and I agree with a lot of what you're saying and know about the study that Outside In did. And there's a lot of truth in that study in terms of the fact that kids wind up running from foster care or aging out of that system and wind up on the streets instead of where they should be, in a much more appropriate place to grow up. The state social welfare system has been trying to look at, and there was actually a Citizens Crime Commission report in the last year about looking at this issue of transitioning kids better from foster care to adulthood and making sure that kids just at 18, the door isn't closed and they're just, no more service. There's a recognition that the foster care system has the responsibility that parents have, which is that you don't just kick your 18-year-olds out and say, we're done with you. As Lateefah was saying, if your 18-year-olds go to college, they come live with you during the summer, or you know where they are, and you know that it's an appropriate, okay place for them, and you provide them with some financial support if you can, and a lot of emotional support. And kids in the foster care system didn't get any of that. 18 came and that was it, unless out of the goodness of their hearts, their foster parents wanted to continue to support them. And so one of the things that's a national trend to look at is, can they do a better job of that? The other thing is that there was a law passed a few years ago that forces the family court system to move kids more rapidly to adoption. So one of the ideas of that legislation, which has some problems in and of itself, but one of the ideas of that legislation is not to keep kids in that foster care limbo forever, but to figure out more quickly, and the timeline is a year, to figure out whether or not the family is going to be able to take that child back. And if they're not going to be able to take that child back, then to move that kid into adoption status as opposed to holding them in foster care status. And I think from the perspective of many kids, that's a real system improvement. There are some challenges because you need to be able to provide supports to the families, especially drug and alcohol treatment, because pretty much 100% of the families in the foster care system, there's drug and alcohol involvement. You need to be able to provide that intervention to the family within that year and do it speedily so they have an opportunity to recover to be able to keep their kids. But those are a couple of things that the system's doing. They're baby steps. And it's a system that needs a lot of our attention as concerned citizens to make it better.
Well, that's all the time we have. Joanne Fuller, Lateefah Simon, thank you so much for joining us today. And we're adjourned.